So
Oh, Danny, it's been so long since I last spoke to you.
I know it's been like a whole 2 minutes because you got what was it, tea or coffee?
Tea. Tea, I am
Tea.
British.
Sorry.
Very weak
Well,
tea, but
I don't drink tea or coffee. Um, I don't drink anything caffeinated. Do you think I need caffeine?
yeah, good point.
Give me caffeine. No, don't do that.
That would be very funny. I always want to see it at least once.
Well, it's for the same reason I don't drink. Just yeah, drink alcohol. Like just no,
I don't
just
drink
no.
alcohol, but I drink tea and a lot of it.
Yes. Do you want to do the introduction explanation thingy this time?
We're going to talk about stuff. Um,
Is that the title? Talk about stuff.
no, what's good as your title?
Mine was all the things. At least it like rolls off the tongue. Not talk about stuff.
Yeah, so we have just recorded last week. No, yeah, last week's episode. And we ended on a
Timelines
little
are all
bit.
over the place. Like it's last week episode, but it's next week's
yeah, I
episode.
know.
So we're now recording 2 weeks ahead. So it was last week.
Head. Yeah. So we left the last episode that you would have listened to, or maybe you haven't, on a bit of a cliffhanger because we just realized that we don't have very much time left. And so that what Danny was mentioning was around labels as being harmful. So labels meaning neurodiverse, autistic, etc., etc. And I had shock horror, a different experience.
See,
Uh,
that's a little bit different because like normally we go with opinions, but this is an experience, and I would expect you to have a different experience.
Yeah. And also kind of this whole topic of that we were having was around discovering like ecological dynamics, dynamical systems theory. Yes, said it right first time. And
Okay.
like how I have shifted. I mean, you've been in it for 6+ years, probably more now.
I was familiar with the viewpoint for about 6, 7 years, but I didn't really adopt it as my frame of thinking until probably about third year uni, so maybe 3 years, 4 years now.
Yeah. And so for me, I've only really been adopting it in the last what
Maybe year.
Yeah, I have been familiar with it for maybe a year and a little bit, but it's only been the last year I've slowly been like, oh, okay, oh, okay, and just slowly adjusting it. But in the last 3 months, it's been very much like it is my brain has started to default. As soon as something I hear doesn't sound quite right, I am like, oh, boom, this doesn't match. This is weird. Okay, cool. How would I approach it from this way? What constraints have I forced upon myself and assumptions that I've made? Like, what assumptions have I made that have forced a constraint on me? And is that assumption accurate to the environment that I'm in? And
Hmm.
I'm like, half the time, no.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I feel like ecological dynamics and the terms and words that I use from the research has helped you verbalize some of the struggles that you had.
Yes. Yeah, that sounds accurate. It's very much verbalize the struggle, and it's that verbalizing the struggles and also being able to kind of move from like the victim mindset as such of like my life is hard, everything's difficult, and moving into an actual like problem solving, coming up with ideas and solutions and things that I can actually do and steps I can actually take that aren't one incredibly overwhelming, although sometimes they do feel overwhelming. But even when they do feel overwhelming, I can then constrain. I have an answer that
Mm.
helps, even if it's not the solution. I have a step, I have a next step, and that doesn't seem to end for me. And that's really helped me in like understanding my own identity, coming to terms with that, and like moving beyond that and figuring out a way of working, or well, basically adopting the whole idea of the
Becoming an
environment.
ecological learner.
Yeah, becoming an ecological learner
I do
or a
love that term.
divergent. What was it?
Divergent by design.
Yeah,
Yeah.
divergent by design.
Well, I think everyone is divergent by design, and I think some people can become an ecological learner when they grasp or get a better understanding of the perspective. It's not a revolutionary thing
No,
because,
it's relatively boring.
yeah, because when you look at it, it's ecology. Now, when I say this, I'm going to do a video about my ecological perspective. When I say ecology, most people will think ecosystems. So they'll think fish, animals, trees, birds, grass, like all the naturey stuff. My sister's the same. She's a zoologist. But it's right, but not the whole story, because ecology is about an organism in an environment, and that
Yeah.
organism can be a person. And when you look at it like that, okay, I'm a person in an environment. Well, now I have constraints and affordances in that environment because I'm now in an ecosystem, i.e., a system of people, a system of things. And because the human environment is much more diverse than the natural environment when it comes to affordances inside of there, that's where it gets very complex. And for whatever reason, humans have decided, nope, our brains are different to animals. We work different, so we need a different way to frame it. I disagree.
Yeah.
I think we are animals. We are just, yes, we are different from animals, but we still run by the same rules, pretty much.
Yeah.
Same
Yeah.
natural rules, same natural ecosystems. It just looks different. Like, animal is not going to build a skyscraper. Humans can. And that's what I think being an ecological learner has helped me through. Like,
Yeah.
helped me
Same.
understand it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, like, just recently upon, and I've been reflecting on this a lot. What's a reflective practitioner? But like, there's been so many reflections that I've had recently of like, I'm just doing stuff. Like, I'm actually, and what I mean by that is like, I'm just going out there and just trying and not really, I'm not attached to the end goal anywhere near as much as I used to be. And so the couple of really good examples of this is things like D&D. So I have been relatively new to the D&D space. I don't know how long I've been doing it now, but I love my RPGs, role-playing games and stuff like that. So it kind of felt like a natural movement. And so for me, I absolutely love the game. And then they needed DMs. Now, under normal circumstances, I would go no, because in previous circumstances, like, no, well, I don't know everything yet. And until I know everything, I cannot do anything. And I don't know all of the rules, as my players will tell you. But it's very much like, and instead I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm just gonna do it. And I was just like, yeah, all right, then I'll DM. I still research because I want things in my environment to support me so that I have constraints that I can follow, because you can go anywhere with this game and it's nuts. So I need the constraints, because if I have
you want to be aware of the affordances.
Yeah, I want to be aware of the, thank you. I want to be aware of the affordances that are there and then constrain them so I don't go nuts everywhere and then overwhelm myself, because that's exactly what would happen. And so I am now I'm running two different campaigns. So a campaign is like a bunch of regular sessions that happen that have an overarching storyline. And they're both very different. And I obviously use Obsidian to plan it all, because I would never use anything else. And I very much follow a sort of, yeah.
Do you think understanding Obsidian has given you an affordance to pursue RPG games?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. I couldn't do this in Notion. I could not do it.
I know you were interested while we were in Notion, and I never really understood why you didn't do it. I just assumed it was not a thing that you wanted to pursue. But as soon as you're like, I'm doing this, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, because the problem with Notion is that everything was too. I had to over plan in Notion,
Right.
because of the constraints that Notion had, and they were a ton of constraints. Like online all the time. Like I could not imagine that. Whereas in the way that I run my D&D sessions, they are very much living the ecological, things just appear
Emergent.
and emerge. Emergence is literally my entire philosophy when it comes to being a DM, is that the story emerges and I follow it.
We'll figure it
Like
out
I
as
have,
we go.
I put things, I put a constraint in of like, here's the thing, someone said this, what do you want to do? And then they follow that and I follow them and things naturally emerge. And it's wonderful because when these things emerge, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have a little bit of that. And I'm gonna go put that over there, as I was saying in the last episode. Just gonna take that. Thank you very much. That's gonna make your next 6 months of your campaign as you try and help yourself after you promised a water elemental that you do anything for them. Thank you. And that
We
literally
will
happened.
quote
And
you
I'm
on
like,
that.
and it's really nice. And I was having a discussion with another DM. He came into a one shot. So a one shot is a more constrained campaign. It's designed to be one session. It's one and done. And what I realized is within the constraints of a one shot, the way that I traditionally work doesn't quite fit because not everything was done. The results, the end goal, although everyone had a ton of fun, and that was, I didn't really care. One of the things I realized is we didn't get to everything because I was following that approach of like emergence.
Yeah.
And in 3 hours, there isn't enough time for too many things to emerge. And so that constraint has led to me going in a different approach in future when I run a one shot. And that kind of, maybe it's not actually a different approach. It's just a different environment.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, and then my brain just went, oh yeah, actually. Yeah. So it's a different environment, and so that environment needs different constraints and affordances. So
But that's something you've learned from a previous practice, and that's
yeah.
where repetition without repetition. So you're doing the same thing, just with a minor difference, and that's where the
And
bifurcation
that's
word comes in.
yeah, exactly. And so every single time one of my players mentioned, oh, I like how you've got different things each time, like different parts of my DM's toolkit each time. I'm like, yeah, that was because I didn't like this, because the way that this ran didn't feel right, and I wanted to try this. And so adding in different constraints, and the thing that I added in the last session that I did was I had these printouts for initiative and the monsters, so that I had that and I could write that down, and it wasn't on note cards, because if my pencil runs out or something, then I would be in trouble and I wouldn't be able to keep track of everything, because my brain is not naturally a maths person, but I am aware of that, so I use that, and that awareness for me has helped. And it's really interesting because I was discussing getting to the point, like when I was discussing with another DM like how they run their sessions, it was the exact opposite almost. Like they had planned like 6 or 7 like this, they had spreadsheets and everything. I'm like, that sounds cool, but
So much
like,
work.
one, it's too much work, and two, I like myself, I just wouldn't enjoy it as much.
Mm.
Now, I think there was some value in what they were telling me and talking to me as a more experienced DM. I'm like, yeah, cool. So I am often scrambling towards the end of one of my sessions to get prepared for the next one. So maybe I will kind of go a little bit further and have a little bit more, just so that I'm kind of more planning in advance a little bit. But so I'm experimenting with maybe planning 2 campaigns versus one campaign, like one session, sorry. One for each person, one extra, so that I have a little bit more in advance, so I can start poking things in there as things emerge. But I'm kind of trying to balance that with like, I want to see things emerge more. Like my desire is to have them say one little thing and I'm like, thank you. And then like for me as a player, that's what I like, when someone takes what I said and it becomes part of the bigger campaign. Like I don't see that very much in the sessions that I have.
That's where the constraints-led approach is. Oh, I'm going to throw a load of jargon terms at you now, which may get confusing. That's where the constraints-led approach inside of coaching, specifically non-linear pedagogy, gets involved with motivation and the self-determination theory. Thank you. Words. And and because it's non-linear, motivation can be autonomous. So you're given autonomy to player, or in this case, well, I guess they're still a player of the game. And because they have autonomy, they are more motivated to be involved and engaged with the thing. And that's come through the non-linear like practice, which comes from this constraints-led approach to coaching rather than this is what we're doing today, this is what we're practicing. It's very hard to get autonomy from players through that because they're just told what to do and they follow instructions. Because you're not saying this is what you're going to do, you're saying, okay, can you try and do this, please? And they go off and do some weird, so like, how the what? Okay, cool. That's not what I was
I have a
expecting.
great example of that, of like, it's very much a good example of this was actually in the one shot that I just did. There was a little very irritating and annoying floating head that was part of the final boss battle of that session. I love how I'm just like, wait, what?
Floating head, like where did that come from?
Yeah,
Okay,
there's a skull that was basically winding up the players.
right.
Because there was the final boss, the hag, was looking through the head
skull,
to see
right.
what was it doing, right?
Yeah.
And so they killed it. It was not quite anticipating. So I'm like, right, and you've just destroyed the way that the main villain can check on you. I can't see them being very happy about that. So she literally, and it also just so happened that I was running low on time, so we needed to wrap up the session. So I'm like, right, you're in trouble now. She's coming through. So she literally, and because we're in a magical world, and
Yeah, you can make it up.
I literally just she came from within that, and then started the final battle, and they loved it. They absolutely loved it. But that was because I had time as a constraint, which is lovely. We all do in many ways, shape, or forms. But like, it was good fun.
Mm.
But even, and I'm just like excited to see how it continues because I also don't know, which I enjoy.
That right there is why constraints-led approach to coaching is useful for learners, beginner learners in creativity and imagination, because they can come up with any solution they want. A lot of kids, when you do constraints for the first time, when they've been drilled certain ways, when you tell them, okay, how can you do this? They'll come up with one solution and that's it. Like, this is the best way to do it. Just because it's the best, most efficient way to do it doesn't mean it's the only solution. And that is where, so this is something I did with fundamental movement skills with really young kids. Most kids learn how to run and how to walk. But unless you're in gymnastics, you don't learn how to do a forward roll, how to roll on your side, how to crawl. Like, it's something that you have to do in the playground or mess around somewhere. But when you're learning, for example, football, you're never going to do a forward roll in football. So what I did with fundamental movement skills is, okay, I set up constraint-led approach. You've got to move this ball to that side of the pitch without using your feet. And then obviously now they're on their knees, kicking the ball with their knees. Okay, now you can't use your knees or your feet. And now like they're shuffling along on their bum, or some of them are rolling forwards and sideways. They all do completely different things, but they're all learning how to move their body in different ways. And all I've said is get the ball from that line to that line, and you can't use your feet or your knees. And they're learning how to move their body in a drastically different way. And what I remember this one session because it sticks out to me. I did this thing at the start. It's the first time I coached this group of kids. I think they were like nine, like under nines, under 10 sort of thing. And one of them had never done a forward roll before, ever. Like 9, 10 years old, never done a forward roll. And they saw someone else do it. And they're like, that's cool. And I helped this person during a football session how to do a forward roll. And the best part about it was at the end of the session, when they fell over backwards. Normally they put their arms out like to stop them, but they just backward rolled. Like they'd never done a forward roll or a backward, but I mean, it wasn't straight, it was crooked and they sort of fell over sideways. But when they went down, they fell over, did a backward roll, like got onto hands and knees, stood up and then sprinted off. And their parents said to me afterwards, how did you teach him about backwards roll? I didn't. I taught him how to do a forwards roll at the beginning of the session. He had just naturally gone, oh, I can go forwards, I can go back, and just did a backward. I was like, what? In gymnastics, sometimes it takes kids like 3 or 4 months to get backwards roll because it's scary going backwards. He had the momentum because it was just been pushed over from football and just did a backwards roll. And I was like, okay. Okay. And it's those sorts of things as a coach that I really enjoyed. You're like, that kid's just learned how to do a forward roll, a backwards roll, how to get up from a different situation, and isn't like slow in football. So not only has improved his physical movement skills, but also his ability to play football and potentially transfer it to other sports. I'm like, that right there is why constraints to me, or that sort of approach of things, like just giving people environments to learn, is so beneficial, which is why moving sort of a little bit sideways into the labels, which is why I really struggled with labels, because the labels are, yeah, I saw you move sideways. The labels are saying, this is you, this is what you do, this is what you can, can't, should, shouldn't do. And I really struggle with those. When I was younger, I like really struggled with that. Being half deaf, I already had this label of being the deaf kid or the half deaf kid. It wasn't like people picked on me or bullied me, but it was something that I knew I had to work with. I couldn't sit on one side of the room because I just couldn't hear. When people were talking, sometimes I didn't hear. People would say things behind my back and I wouldn't know they're talking, let alone talking about me or what they're talking about. I just don't know. So I already had that label. I didn't like that label to start with. Then when people start adding other labels on top, like, for me, I just felt like I was this categorized thing. This is all you can do. This is all you're good at, sort of thing. And in my head at the time, that was not good. Like, I became the sporty kid that was half deaf, that was good at like sciencey stuff. Like, I was good at maths, I was good at science, but I was awful at like English. English, music, and art. Just bad at those things. And that became me. I became the sporty maths kid that was half deaf. So whenever I went to English, I hated art, I hated music. I did as I was told, I did what I was expected. All the teachers loved me because I didn't mess around, etc., etc. But I hated those classes because in my head, I had this label of, I'm not good at this thing. And as I move forwards through primary school, through secondary school, and then going to university, more labels get added. And as more labels got added onto me, I was like, okay, I can't focus on all of these. I can't sit there and focus in a lecture. I was looking outside. I never took notes. I met up with a lecturer a few months back, and he remembered that I never took notes. It was like a joke, between like the cohort. Danny never takes notes, but he knows what he's talking about. It's just like this ongoing joke. And that was a label that I got at the beginning of uni, as this person that never pays attention, but somehow seems to know what's going on. And at the start of uni, I was in a really bad state mentally. So the first part of that was really bad. Like, I was kicked out of a couple of lectures because I didn't take a pad in or a thing. That's a whole other story. But I was kicked out because I couldn't do it. Partly because of my hearing, partly because of my attention. I think I just smacked the mic. Apologies. But it was a struggle, and having all of those labels weighing on me with everything else that happened in my life personally, which I may go into in a video story. I'm not going to speak on it now because I don't know where I'm going to go, where I want to go. But it was hard, and those labels didn't help, and it hurt more than helped, and it made it harder to get rid of it because I felt like I had to get rid of this label. But how do I get rid of this label that is me? I can't do that. Like, I can't suddenly not become half deaf. I can't suddenly pay attention to this guy standing at the front of a lecture hall for 2 hours when my brain is going in so many other directions. I just can't do that. So I can't get rid of this label. And the only way I got around that is by fully adopting ecological like psychology and looking at that perspective and going, you know what? No, that's not a label. No, that's not me. That's only part of me in that context.
That right there. I think that's where I didn't understand you and your experience at first. Of like the traditional kind of viewpoint that I had was like you were just rejected labels. They didn't exist. There was no label. But what you said there was like really helpful for me to understand your experience and also get a better understanding of mine, of like it is part of me, but it isn't all of me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was something that I think I got that really early on, of like it's part of who I am and not all of who I am. I didn't have it. I don't think I ever had it. Obviously biases, yeah. Um, like I don't think I ever had it as autism was me. It always felt a part of who I am, just as much as I'm blind in one eye. Like it's part of who I am, and I don't really talk about this part. Actually, I don't talk about it because it's just I know no different.
Yeah.
So it's just yeah, whatever.
I
And I
think
think
I think what didn't help me, obviously in my own context, is I in my head, I wanted to be normal. Like I'd always been abnormal. I've always been abnormal.
yes,
And all the way through school, like, do you need help with this? Do you need support with this? Do you want to do this? Do you want to have more time? I'm like, no, no, just treat me like a normal person. Treat me like you treat everyone else.
I just don't want to be seen. I just want to be normal. That's my experience. Like,
Yeah,
I don't want to be seen. I don't want to be seen as different. I don't want extra things. I don't want this. Like, I want to be able to just do it like everybody else can.
exactly.
Why
It's
should
not
I be
necessarily do
treated?
it. It's just not get special treatment. I don't want
Yeah,
special treatment for having this thing that is different. Just
yeah. That is also
leave me
completely and
alone.
utterly out of your control.
Yeah.
That was the hard bit for me. It's like it was completely and utterly out of my control.
Mm,
This is just something that I struggled with. There's nothing I can do about it, and it ticks me off. That was my
mm,
brain. Like I don't want to XYZ. I don't want to be like this. Why can't I be I wanted to be someone else.
mm.
That's what it was, of like the want to be someone who I'm not.
And
And
that's where to me I think the labels hurt in my own like mental gymnastics because I wanted to be normal, but I knew I couldn't be normal. And
it
the
was
late
part of who you are. Yeah.
exactly. And that's why I struggled so much. Yeah.
I think this is also like I put labels are not harmful. And I think they're not harmful and they're also not good. Like something that I'm kind of
When I said labels, I don't know whether I said labels don't exist. But I think when I said labels are harmful, I think it's because labels they're categories, and when you listen to just the category, it's not the whole story. And so I don't personally see a benefit in the label because most of the time, the point of a label is to help categorize you with other people or help with comparison. And to me, a label being for comparison isn't helpful because I don't want to compare myself with other people all of the time. Because I know we're different now. Like now in
yeah.
my head, I know we're all different. I know the comparison. There's going to be differences. There's going to be changes. You're going to be better at some things. I'm going to be better at other things. We're both going to suck at some things. We're both going to be great at some things. But the labels are always comparison. And I don't want to be comparing myself to other people all the time because we're always all different. And there's no winner. There's no loser. But everyone struggles with comparison because in our heads, there is always a winner and loser. And getting over that meant
That
getting rid of
binary.
labels. Yeah. Getting over
Yeah.
winner loser comparison meant for me getting rid of labels.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, like the label helped me see more of the environment in a way because I was like, okay, cool. Like this is what I understand now of like, okay, cool. So I am autistic. What does that actually mean to me? And it was about like kind of the way I see it is like I'm kind of just walking around in this big building of like, cool, that's a door. Huh, cool. Let me go peek in there. Let me open that door and let that in. And like be like, okay, cool. What's that look like? Okay, cool. Well, people say this, and there's the comparison, and I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't match me. This is me. And I'm like, cool, this feels like me. This is a part of who I am. This is how I respond. This is what autism means to me. So I take the bits that I want and then I shut the door and it becomes part of the environment, the bigger environment of what it is. It's kind of like a compartment of me. And it's very much as I've been learning more about like the whole philosophy, which I don't even have a good one word for. It's like you need this. It's like the more I realize how it was interesting because I never found autism or neurodiverse as a negative label, as a harmful label. However, as I was listening to you, I realized that there were harmful labels that I did have that I found harmful. One of them is I am not a creative person. And what I meant by that is I'm not an art person. I'm not an arty-farty person because and what I meant by that is I'm not good at it. I can't do it in the same way that everybody else can comparison. And that was the interesting thing. And something that I'm working through now in my own head of like is shedding that. I suppose it's an identity of like, I am a thinker, not a creator, except to think I create and I create things from what I think. And it becomes more, it doesn't make sense.
Mm.
And I think like the labels are almost like AI as it's a starting point. It's never the end. It's never the like conclusion. It is where I start, not where I end. Where often, in my experience, it's people end at the label.
Yeah.
And it's the assumption that I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not a business person. I'm autistic. I have ADHD, which means I can't do this. It's the automatic assumption of I can't. And that's when
it's the conversations like that irritate me.
Well, the I can't because
it's the label. My ADHD brain says blah blah blah, or because I'm ADHD, this, or and
so
I'm like,
I think like this is my because this is where I was. I've been there. We've had these conversations before, and I think it's because in the environments that we're in, nobody talks about the environments.
That's what I mean by like verbalizing what you were saying. I don't think the people that say my ADHD brain or my brain's different from yours or people with ADHD do X, Y, Z. I think they use those words and those terms because they don't have any other words to use.
Yes. That was my experience. And it's like that's something that I'm really passionate about in terms of the neurodiverse space of like I don't even think it's a reframe, but it's almost an expansion.
I think it's a translation.
Yeah, it's a translation of like, okay, cool. Instead of my ADHD brain thinks this, it's like the environment that I need to do these things are. And it's like once I got that in my own head, it changed everything. And it's so flipping simple because it is when you look at it and it makes sense. It's like everybody knows that we're all different and one size doesn't fit all, but no one talks about how to break out of the one size fits all, how to move beyond one size fits all, which is where I think that like that right there is the bit that nobody fucking talks about. Well, we do, but like, so if you, unless you're in these conversations, which are hours long, because it's useful to talk about it for hours because it's complicated, and it's also complicated and not complicated.
There are lots of parts. What I find ironic is when you look at the everyone's different argument. Everyone says that everyone's different, but the actions don't match that because when you go looking for it, no one that I have found says we are all exactly the same. No one says that. But the advice that they give is built from that assumption. But they don't acknowledge it. And so inside cognitive psychology, there's a concept called anatomical modularity, which is essentially saying everyone's brain is modular. Like you have this section for this and this section for that and this section for this. And it's not wrong, but it's not right because you can use a different part of your brain for that thing. So, for example, people that don't have a right side of their brain can't use the right side of their brain to do the things everyone else does there. So everyone's brain is going to be slightly different. Different parts of the brain are going to be used for different things. So anatomical modularity is sort of a thing in some people, but it's different everywhere. But the assumption that everyone has the hippocampus is for this thing, well, that's not true for everyone. And when you recognize that it's not true for everyone, which everyone knows is not true for everyone, you then need to change the action. But people don't change the action. And the advice given is built on the assumption that everyone works in the same way. And working memory is the biggest example of this. Everyone has a working memory. Okay, what is working memory? What is the thing? Oh, it's a amount of chunks that you can hold in your brain.
What's
Right,
a
okay.
chunk?
Exact. And as soon as you ask people those questions, what is a chunk? Well, it's a group of information, right? Well, what is a big chunk and a small chunk for that person and
What's
that person?
information?
Well, yeah, I mean that's going very deep. but but the more you probe the question about what working memory is and how it applies in different contexts, the essentially the bigger the hole they dig themselves in not being able to answer because there isn't a good answer for it because you can't measure it.
And the reply is awful. Well, everybody's different. I'm like,
Yeah, I
that's
know.
the point.
Exactly. and it's and it's one of those things where in my head, I don't know whether you feel the same. In my head, when I recognize that these assumptions were built from the everyone is the same, like it's a fundamental assumption that people make. When I realized, hey, if I change my perspective, this is me moving into ecological perspective like 4 years ago. If I change my perspective and look at it like this and say, okay, everyone is different, how can I then change my behaviors because I'm slightly different, i.e., look at the affordances and constraints of the environment? It gave me freedom. It gave me
Yes.
freedom in the
Yes.
choices that I could make. And that's how
Yes.
I feel.
Yes. Yeah, that is exactly how like and going back to the art thing, as I was saying, as a specific example, it's like I've got craft shit. I've literally this week set up a crafting table so that I can do craft because I want to start building dungeon tiles and stuff like that. I'm not a crafty person in my head, that's what I keep saying, but I want to do it because I'm excited because hey, I can do this because it's just an opinion. Like I haven't tried it. I don't know. I just assume that I'm not a crafty person. No, I'm not a crafty person in the way that art is taught in schools. I'm not a crafty person in X way or Y way. Put me on a digital platform, I can probably make some really good stuff. Like I know I could.
Mm.
It's I am not this type of person in this place, in this environment, and with these constraints. Give me different affordances with different constraints. I am like flying and I'm excited and I'm like, yeah, let's do this. And it's and that is the thing.
I think that's how I get started. Like when people say, "I don't know how you get started," like, because it's like the biggest like bottleneck for most people is like, how do you get started doing the thing?
Yeah. How do you do it? How do you
Yeah.
do the doing? Yeah.
How do you actually practice? And I think because we're looking at the constraints-led approach to practice, we don't need to get in our head, this is how I'm going to start practicing. Like bringing sport into this, I have a warm up. I have a warm up for the practice and I'm constraining it to go. So I don't need to say, right, I'm going to start doing this work right now. It's okay, I need to build up some constraints to get myself going. And that's all I do. I just build an environment. But building an environment looks drastically different every single time because practice is different every single time. So there's not a this is how I start.
That's why I
Yeah.
find the weekly review stuff so weird and foreign to me.
Hmm. I tried doing the weekly review in the job, but it's just I mean, I said it right to start with. I don't journal. I don't journal anymore. The only reason I did journal is to try and get my thoughts out of my head. It was part of reflection, not as a like planning journal, bullet journal thing. It was reflection on topics, which I now do inside of my Obsidian writing. And then when it comes to reviews or weekly reviews or OKRs and blah blah blahs, that's just yeah, that's just no. I know what's going on because I'm in it. I'm in the practice. When you ask an expert something about the research they're in, they don't need to go back to their weekly review or their last journal. They know their arguments, they know their points. It's in their head. They are living it. It is part of their practice. You ask me about ecological dynamics, I'm in the practice. I'm speaking about it every weekend, and most of the time I'm inside the research related to it in some way. Same with educational systems, same with YouTube. You ask me to talk about finances, I'll be a little bit lost. I need to have a look at my notes on that because it's not my practice.
Yeah.
We don't have
Yeah.
any points from last week, so
I know. I'm just like, yeah. It and I think for me bringing this into like
okay, a question for you then. How
yes.
would you suggest someone gets started in understanding an ecological perspective? if they've listened to this and gone, that sounds really cool, you've inspired me to get started, where would you suggest they go? Because for me, it's very difficult because it's the expertise reversal effect.
Yeah.
I am so far ahead, I don't know what questions you would have at the start. And he's thinking, just so audio.
Yeah, no, I am. Um,
Because it's not like you can go, oh, just go watch this video or just go read this massive textbook. Like,
I think it was very, I think I had primed myself for this, like for the ecological approach before before we actually had these conversations. There was a course that I took that I was part of that kind of almost primed me for it. And it was very much like removing that boundary that I had. Like it was the binary. That's where I started. It's like, what if we assumed that the binary doesn't exist? Like, what would happen if you removed that binary? So that I'm using the constraints-led approach right now. Of course I am. Like if you remove that binary, what would it look like? If you assume this is the thing that I use with my clients. Like, let's assume that you're not broken, that you've not got a problem, that there's not something wrong with you. I mean, when do you work well? What does it look like? Is where I would start. Like when you are working well, what does that look like? And why? And it's that, like, I always start, I think self-reflection is the best place. That's where I started to start and exploring it from there. And then maybe looking at constraints and affordances. I mean, my workshop's pretty good on that because I talk about it from a business sense. So it's quite useful. So my task taming is very much the constraints-led approach. So that's a good place to start if you want to actually have a course. But like it's very much like thinking from that, like, what are the constraints I have here? What blocks do I have? This can be starting with, what binaries am I sticking to? Like, what are the binaries that I have in this conversation, in my thought process? What are they? Okay, this is the binary. Okay. Do I believe that binary? Okay. No. Is there something wrong with that? And then just like poking, slowly, gently when something doesn't feel right, I know that there is something in the environment. I know when something doesn't feel right. It's a gut reaction. I think that might be expertise coming in there a little bit, which obviously doesn't help at first. But I think we all have a fundamental gut reaction that something doesn't sound right, even if we don't know why.
Mm. I think that to me is everyone's natural learning process. There's a critical element of going, I don't believe that. I'm not sure about that. There is always an element of that skepticism. And I think there is a line that each of us draw on each bit of information that we see.
Find the line and step on it.
Yeah.
Find the line and step on it. And see what happens when you step on it.
Mm. It's funny. The question I'm having in my head right now, which I'll just like allude to, is an ecological learner. What do they look like? What does an ecological learner look like? Can it be different from a traditional learner? Like, what is that line? Is there a line? I don't think there is.
No, because that sounds like a constraint.
Exactly. So
Yeah,
it's literally a paradox. Like, in order to be an ecological learner, you need to be not looking at lines.
And also it's interesting because as I've now been exploring it, I've actually gone back into information processing again and looking at information processing from a different lens,
Yeah.
which is interesting because when I look at that, I'm like, okay, cool. And it's not like you're wrong. It's not like you're wrong. It's like, oh, I see. It is very much, oh, I see.
Yeah. Because I think because I'm the same. Like when I went through ED and then came back into IP, I was reading the research again, and I understand where they're coming from. I see the evidence, like I did before, but because I now have a comparative view, I can look at it a little bit more critically and say, I'm not sure about that. And then when you probe those questions, there just doesn't seem to be answers for IP. When you probe the questions of ED, there aren't concrete answers, but that's because ED is very hard to be concrete because it is built on systems that are dynamic. So it's not like there isn't an answer. There's not a clear answer that you can grab hold of. And I think this comes back to what I can't remember the guy's name anymore. What one of the people spoke about with nouns and verbs. It's hard to isolate a verb as a thing because it's a doing word. It's not something you can isolate. You misspelt the. You spelled TGE. I was like, what in the world is that?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I've got the screen up on the other one. But yeah, so I think when it comes to answers for ecological learners, it's like trying to pick up water. You can
Yeah.
only pick up so much, and if you try and pick up a little bit more, you got to lose everything else.
Yeah.
You can only look at a little bit at a time. You can't really see the whole pond, as it were, um, which makes it very difficult to give like advice on. Which is why I asked, like, where would you get started? Because at the moment, I don't think there is a good starting place to have this sort of perspective.
I know, because it's all sport, which puts most people off.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my want and desire is to bring all of these philosophies into business. Like,
I guess would you say the ecological perspective is like a new wave movement sort of thing? Because like Atomic Habits did its thing when it came out. Everyone was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" It's similar with taking smart notes. It's sort of like a really niche thing, and it sort of created its own movement. Building a second brain is obviously its own thing. Do you see ecological psychology as that? Because I mean, it's so old. Like it's going on like 70 years.
it feels new. That's the thing. And then you look at the papers of 70 years old,
Yeah.
and you're like, well, shit.
I mean, you could argue it's 72, like it's from 1972, but I mean, it was worked on before then, and there's relations between some of the theory and stuff before that as well,
Obviously, there's
looking at.
Gestalt, and Gestalt is in there as well a little bit. And yeah, it was interesting because my journey started with Gestalt, and then the things that I didn't like about Gestalt led me in here. But I am not the average person that looks at this stuff. I go very deep, very fast.
I disagree.
Oh,
Who do you think is looking at this stuff?
I have no idea. I suppose people. Good question.
Because I think the people that are looking at this stuff are the people similar to us that are
Yeah,
interested, that ask questions, that want to know what's going on, that they have an intrigue into this stuff. Everyone's going to research to different depths about different topics, but I think a lot of people in this space are interested, and I think that's an assumption that a lot of coaches make about kids, is the kids don't know as much as the coaches, which is such a poor assumption. And I think it's the same with a lot of people that are sharing information online, is they assume the other learners don't know the same amount as them. That's one of my
mm,
irritations with some of the creators online, is they say, it's like, oh yeah, I've done research, and they've looked at like 2 papers and they do a video about it. And then you've got academics that have read like 50 systematic reviews. You're like, yeah, you're wrong on so many different levels, but I really don't care about commenting. um, and I feel like a lot of people in this space, probably most people that are listening to us now, are in the field. They know stuff we don't know. They have perspectives
I
and
think that
experiences
that
on
is.
stuff we don't know.
It's just realized. It's just triggered a reminder of like, because we were thinking of whether to even upload it onto the podcast
Mm.
to Spotify and all the platforms. And then when we actually looked, we had quite a lot of listeners, and we're like, "Oh shit! Okay, all right, yeah. We have people who listen.
And
Yes, then."
and that's what I mean. I think because we because we don't really know what's out there, like who's out there. It's kind of like, it's not finding your niche, but there is a group of people that are interested in this research, that we know are interested in the research, because cognitive psychology is a field, neuroscience is a field, learning is a field. There are loads of people in educational professions that know about this stuff. Like, well, I was watching an interview with a teacher on the news recently about the whole head teacher suicide thing on Ofsted, and she made an argument about multiple intelligences, the book that was like 40, 50 years old now, and she uses multiple intelligences inside of education in primary schools. Like, in my head, for whatever reason, I hadn't thought that teachers look at this stuff, but of course they do, because multiple intelligences is about education. And it just made me realize that actually most people look into the research on this stuff if they're in it.
Yeah, I think that's it. Like, once you're aware of it, you start. Like, I think that is actually the case. And it's just the first, because I've seen other kind of very popular creators start looking at the origins of building a second brain.
Oh, really? I'm interested, because I
Yeah,
kind of know the answer to that.
they went and read oh shit.
Annie
Annie's
Murphy
book.
Paul?
Yeah, Annie Murphy Paul's book. And they went, "Oh, that's the best thing I've ever read. Like, that's the one of the greatest books I've ever read." And I'm like, "Cool, welcome." Because it was through my stuff that I suggested it. I'm like, that was sort of the thing. So I look at all the business recommendation books, so the like best recommended books for business, and I'm like, that sucks. That's full of misinformation. That sucks. That's really badly researched. And then I'm like, here, try this. Oh, that sounds very XYZ, blah, 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 blah. And then they read it and they're like, oh, oh. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think we make judgments very quickly.
Yes.
And I think when you see the title of a book, it can be very easy to judge what is in a book and what the book is about. And I know I'm saying book here, but it's the same with videos. It's the same with all sort of content. We're very quick to judge. Don't judge a book by its cover, but we always do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I like that conversation. Anything else you want to add? I was looking at your notes, and I think we've covered everything. So
Yeah, pretty much.
right. See you guys in 3 weeks now, because time.
See you next week.
Bye.
Confused.